It's amazing just how ass backwards the religious often get, well, just about everything, isn't it? This time out, Andy Bannister is going to give it a shot and get absolutely everything wrong. Because since when has Andy ever gotten anything right? So, off we go down the irrationality rabbit hole once again. It's a long drop. Be ready. Andy Bannister, for some weird reason, thinks atheists are afraid of Christianity. In fact, the exact opposite is true. They are terrified of us, which is why they spend so much time talking about us and trying to convince us to change our minds, rather than just producing objectively verifiable and demonstrable evidence that anything that they believe is actually right. Because they can't. Because they have nothing. It really is pathetic when you stop and think about it, isn't it? So, let's go take a look.
Why are some atheists so afraid of changing their mind?
Well, first you'd have to give them a good reason to do so. And whether you like it or not, Andy, you have entirely failed in that regard. All apologists have, and this is somewhere that I think we need to recognize the complete fallacy that is religious apologetics. These are people who think, I'm convinced, therefore everybody else should be convinced too. Except you're an idiot. That explains a lot of things. And you notice this everywhere across the religious landscape. Muslims will all say the same thing. Everything we believe, it's so obvious to us that we must be right. And then Christians don't believe it, so apparently Christians must be afraid to become Muslims, using Andy's poor attempt at logic here. Flat earthers are really sure that they're right. They're dumb, but they're supremely confident. Anti-vaxxers are positive that they're correct. They're not, but if you listen to them, they're really sure. And the same people who believe in Bigfoot and alien abductions and so on and so on and so on, they all think the same way. This is why it's so important to be able to step back from the things that you believe and evaluate them rationally and independently. And the one thing all of these people have in common is that they're utterly unable to do so. But let's get back to Andy and watch him fuck it all up.
You know, one of the things that I have noticed over 2 years of doing these short answer videos is often no sooner have we put them up on Facebook than we get some, and I stress some, very angry, vitriolic members of the secular community posting sort of angry little sound bites underneath them.
It's called a response, Andy. You should expect that. People are disagreeing with what you're saying and proving you wrong. That's something you should probably get used to because you're wrong far more often than you're right. But this is something that we actually see from the religious side, from the irrational side all the time. The belief that they're being disagreed with if people are out there showing them how wrong that they are, somehow that only proves that they're actually right. I'm not sure how that works exactly. This is what happens when you spend your entire life in a bubble and don't know how to get out. Because that describes the religious. They can't change their mind, and they don't even try. And that's why people like Andy are such a laughingstock. They don't know how to logically examine their beliefs to find out if they're true. They don't care. It just makes them feel good, so they believe it uncritically and then pretend that there's some grand conspiracy against them when people who don't share their emotionally comforting beliefs have no problem poking tons of holes in their ideas. And Andy is an excellent example of that. He pretends that he's automatically got it all right, and anyone who disagrees and produces evidence that he's wrong, well, those people are all angry and vitriolic. No, they actually have a point. Too bad Andy entirely misses it.
And those responses have a number of things in common. Often they are just sound bites, just some sort of atheist soundbite they've grabbed off Twitter and parroted, often sort of single line rude remarks, often with bad grammar and a lack of punctuation. Or often there'll be a sort of pushback where the person clearly hasn't even responded to, hasn't even watched the video in question.
Which certainly doesn't apply to me or other atheists who not only watch your videos, we respond to the entire thing to make sure that absolutely nothing we respond to is taken out of context. That's why Andy doesn't acknowledge us, because we fall outside of his narrative and he has no response to make, no intelligent response anyhow. It's why people like Andy ostensibly talk at atheists, or like in this video, talk about atheists, but he never talks to atheists. You know, those people he pretends to be friends with. Yeah, every bit as imaginary as his God. Because we actually ask difficult questions and point out all of the irrational things that apologists like Andy say, but he has no intelligent response. And I think he knows it, so he just pretends that everyone is just sniping at him and not making any good points. Except we are, and he just can't handle it.
In fact, I got so frustrated about this behaviour, I actually wrote a much longer piece that's linked to in the show notes called How to Avoid Being a Village Atheist. But I began to reflect on the behaviour and what drives it.
It's funny that he's entirely missing the fact that he is a village Christian, to use the village idiot comparison. I'm not going to deny that there are some ignorant, uneducated atheists out there posting stupid things with no comprehension of basic grammar or spelling or pretty much anything else. There are. That's just reality. There are also tons of Christians with the exact same problem. And Jews and Muslims and Buddhists and Scientologists, stupid people are everywhere. Yet it's funny that Andy chooses only to address those people and not the ones who are making long, thoughtful responses to his own work, because he really has no answers to offer for those. Therefore, he goes for the low-hanging fruit, which really isn't that surprising since Andy himself is low-hanging fruit for skeptics of religion to go after. But whereas I can't find anyone intelligent to respond to, and I've looked, trust me, you know I've looked, Andy has a lot better targets, but he pointedly ignores them. Kind of funny how that works.
And it occurs to me that for some, just some atheists, and maybe some of you watching this fall into this category, there is almost a sort of fear that they might be wrong. And they can't even bring themselves to engage with the best arguments for the other side. And so the best way to keep God at a distance is to shout and protest and hurl mud. It's a bit like sort of monkeys hurling poo around in the jungle. Anything to just not even consider that my position might be false.
I think you meant true. We know your position is false. You're the one that's claiming that it's true. See, that's the problem that I really have with the religious, and I know I'm not alone. They are so cocksure that they're right, and anyone making legitimate criticisms of their blind faith, those people simply get ignored and dismissed as cranks and people who just don't want to believe. Except that's not us. We have said time and time again that if they could provide sufficient logical, rational, and evidentially based proof that the things that they believe are actually so in the real world, we would change our minds. We would start to believe. I would personally be happy to. Just prove it to me objectively. But of course, they can't do that, and because they can't do that, nobody is moving to their side. Everyone is moving away, and they can't handle that. So everything becomes a vast conspiracy to cover up the truth. You know, that truth that they don't actually have and they can't actually demonstrate. You don't see competing scientific camps pointing fingers and declaring, well, I'm right, but you're just biased against me. Because that's just dumb. Just like Andy is.
And of course that leads to a whole number of problems. If you don't put your beliefs to the test, this goes for Christians as well as atheists, you can't really know that they're ultimately true.
But you don't, Andy. Not really. You live in a religious bubble beyond which you have little or no experience. You view everything through your specific religious lens and demand that reality has to make you happy. But here's the thing, Andy. Reality isn't here to make you feel good. Reality is what it is. Whether you wind up happy or miserable in the end, that just isn't relevant. Reality is what is objectively real, and you're not concerned with that. You really aren't. And that's a problem that you simply refuse to acknowledge. How pathetic is that?
And I think one of the most challenging things you can do as an atheist is really properly, truly investigate the claims of the Christian faith. But if you do that, something might happen, and I think there can be the fears of that.
Except a lot of atheists have done that, and it doesn't work out as you might have hoped. Now, I can't speak for anyone but myself, but as most people watching know, I was once a very strong Christian for a very long time. I had considered going into the clergy in some capacity, and I had pretty much memorized the Bible and was as strong a Christian then as I'm sure Andy considers himself today. Then I got better. Of course, Andy won't agree with that because he has a vested interest in maintaining his emotionally comforting faith, and I and a lot of other very outspoken atheists all started where Andy is now, and we figured out, because we actually cared about reality more so than our emotional state, that Christianity, indeed all religions, simply do not have any objectively verifiable evidence to back them up. It's all wishes and dreams, not facts and objective substantiation. So we don't believe anymore because there's no good reason to believe. Andy doesn't like that fact, so he refuses to acknowledge it. I don't know if that's because Andy is truly as ignorant as he seems and just doesn't know any better, thus making him an idiot, or he does know and he just keeps preaching because it makes him money, thus making him a con man. Let me know which one you think he is in the comments. At the moment, I think it's kind of a toss-up.
One of my friends is a gentleman called Alistair McGrath. He's an Oxford professor, has written many books, and has written many books actually responding to the claims of atheism. And Alistair once told me an unusual story. He had received an email from somebody who'd read one of his books and been very moved by it, and actually had given his life to Christ and become a Christian. But the story of how he'd done so was quite unusual. This Oxford student had been quite a committed atheist, had spent a lot of his time reading atheist books and literature, books by people like Richard Dawkins and others. But then it began to occur to him, because he was a student and had been taught how to think critically, that he had, as he put it, only read one side of the argument. And it occurred to him he really ought to read the other side of the argument.
Except a lot of atheists, and again, I can really only speak in detail about myself, but we know what your side is, Andy. We used to live it. I know Christianity better than the vast majority of Christians. That's why I'm not a Christian. I am never going to accept your point of view emotionally, Andy. If that means I never become a Christian again because of it, so be it. But that's not a problem with my side, that's a problem with yours. I will never believe in your imaginary friend until you can provide objectively testable and verifiable evidence that your God is real. It's the same attitude I have toward Bigfoot. I won't accept that Bigfoot is real until someone throws a carcass up on the table for me to study. That's how rational inquiry works, like it or not. It isn't because we're afraid of you, Andy. Clearly, we're not. It's that you're afraid of us, because we're winning, because religion is failing miserably in the West, and you're just trying to dance and sing a comforting song so people will keep sending you money. I don't make money off my atheism. I do it because it's intellectually valid to shoot down the stupidity of the religious side. You are a con man, Andy. Rent a clue.
And as he began reading the very best Christian philosophers and Christian books he could get his hands on, including some of Alistair's, he suddenly began to realize that those claims of atheism that he had placed so much weight in did not actually stack up. They sort of turn to dust, as he put it, in his hands.
Except atheism makes no claims, and you would know that if you ever bothered to talk to an atheist. This just shows how ignorant Andy actually is. Atheism is the rejection of claims made by the religious for lack of supporting objective evidence. That's it. The second I hear an apologist talking about atheism being a belief system or making claims or holding faith, it's painfully clear that the apologist is either blatantly ignorant or absurdly dishonest. Which one are you, Andy? Pick one, because if you don't understand the opposition, how can you continually make videos about it? I understand you, Andy. I really do. Far better than you understand yourself. You haven't got a clue. What's up with that?
And as he had the courage to follow that line of evidence where it led, it eventually led to him concluding that the claims of Jesus were true, that the Christian faith was true, and he bowed the knee and became a follower of Jesus.
Yet, you can't do that the other direction, can you? Because guess what? A whole lot of people are moving the other way than are joining your silly little religious club. And you can make up all of the excuses and ad hoc rationalizations for why Christianity and other religions for that matter are utterly failing in the West, but the fact remains religious adherence is taking a nosedive and you can't handle it. It's why you spend so much time talking about atheism while making it painfully clear that you have no clue what atheists are even talking about. It makes you a laughingstock, Andy. It really does.
My challenge to you, if you are an atheist watching this or a secular person watching this, you are very, very welcome. We design these videos to be accessible. We would love you to go out and watch more of our short answer videos and not respond with angry comments, but engage with them.
And if we say we have, what then? Oh, you ignore the people who actually know more than you do, Andy. The people who care about reality and not about your emotions. Those aren't the people you want to talk to. Those are the people who are going to call you out on your silly emotional tirades because those just aren't that impressive. I'm not concerned with what makes you happy. I only care about what you can prove to be factually true with objective evidence and rational critical thought. And that is why you're terrified of people like me, Andy, because we make you look bad. Because you are bad.
If I or my colleagues say something you disagree with, raise that in the comments. We're happy to have substantive discussions.
Except you can't. That's the point. You can't provide anything that we're asking for. You can't provide anything that we've been looking for. We are not going to listen to what it says in your book of mythology until you can prove with objective evidence that what the Bible claims ever actually happened in reality. Just because it's written down doesn't make it so. And you can't do that, and you know it. It's all taken on faith, and we don't accept faith as a legitimate method for knowing anything. So you're going to have to do a whole lot better than you do, and we all know that you can't. And that's your problem, not ours.
Or take it one stage further. Challenge yourself to actually read a book written by a Christian academic who knows what he or she is talking about.
Been there, done that, know it every bit as well as you do. I just don't buy into it automatically because it pushes the right emotional buttons. You're not like that, Andy. That's sad but true. We are nothing alike. I care only what is demonstrably so. You care only what makes you feel good. It's why, if I did bring anything up in your comments, you just ignore it because you can't provide what I require, what any rational person requires. You've got nothing. Let us know when you can do it with facts and no faith. Then we just might have something to discuss.
One of the best I can recommend that's come out in the last couple of years is the book Confronting Christianity, written by Rebecca McLaughlin, who is absolutely brilliant British academic now living in the States. You can find it wherever books are sold. Challenge yourself to read it with the same openness that you would read a piece of atheist literature and weigh the evidence.
What evidence? Because that's the point. There is no evidence, only empty claims. Now, I admit I haven't read this book, but I've read tons more that have claimed to be able to prove Christianity is true, and they've all utterly failed. If you look at the description for Comforting Christianity, it claims it uses personal stories and careful biblical study, neither of which actually prove anything. This is the problem. You cannot provide what we require. You cannot provide what any rational person needs to be convinced that it's true. Whether you like it or not, my requirements aren't going to change simply because you can't meet them. That's a problem on your side that you need to deal with.
And if the evidence seems to point more to the Christian faith, have the courage to follow your conviction.
I'd say the exact same thing to people on your side, Andy. Have the guts to actually study Christianity from a rational standpoint. And if it doesn't stand up, as it absolutely does not, then have the courage to reject the irrational blind faith that you're holding for emotional reasons and join objective reality. Because your feelings don't mean a damn thing. I don't care if you like that or not. They simply don't. It's time to grow up and become a rational adult. Give it a shot, Andy. It's really not that hard.
So that can take courage. So especially if your friends around you are your peer group and they're sort of telling you, no, you should be rude to Christians, don't take the arguments seriously. Have the courage to follow your convictions. Because I have every respect for an atheist who has weighed the arguments and hasn't come to the conclusion that they're true. I have very little respect for somebody who's not willing to engage in the first place, because that simply shows fear, not maturity.
And the same is true of you, Andy, but you only have fear and not remotely maturity. This is why you have to flush all of that emotional nonsense from your life and realize that it isn't all about you. That's the biggest problem with irrational beliefs. Believers think that everything is all about them. It has to make them feel good. It has to make sense to them. They have to like it. And they're wrong. Completely and utterly wrong. You don't really matter to reality. Reality doesn't exist for you. You exist because you just so happen to show up in reality. That's it. And it doesn't matter if that fact makes you happy or sad. It's simply the case. And this is why the religious just can't deal with it, because they are so into themselves and their feelings and their wishes and desires and dreams that anything that doesn't serve them, they pretend it doesn't exist, even though it does.
I think Christianity is the greatest news on the planet. I think the evidence stands up. But don't take my word for it. Put it to the test, do the hard work, and be willing to follow it where it leads.
Done and done. I know he says he'll respect people who don't come to his conclusion, but this isn't about respect, it's about truth. If people don't come to the same conclusion that you do, you don't just get to shrug your shoulders and forget all about it. You have to ask yourself why. Where does the failure come in? Why is there this disconnect between the two sides? Is it your side that's wrong, or is it the other? And in this case, whether Andy is willing to admit it or not, it's his side. Flat earthers have a religious faith, almost entirely, that says the earth is flat. They are simply wrong. There is no evidence that shows their conclusions to be reasonable or factually demonstrable. They believe because they have blind faith and nothing else. And Andy is no different. He has no evidence that stands up to critical scrutiny. He likes to pretend that he does, while not understanding what evidence actually is, because I think somewhere deep inside, he knows he needs some kind of corroboration, and therefore he just manufactures it out of whole cloth, so he can pretend he has something. Except he doesn't. Nothing that stands up to any scrutiny anyhow. So when atheists reject his blind faith based on the fact that he's got nothing, he can't accept that. He simply ignores it or pretends that there's some other reason why everyone isn't on his God train to nowhere. This is why debates with the religious never go anywhere. We are very clear about what we require to change our minds. But as Ken Ham once said, absolutely nothing will ever change his mind. Ever. It's not possible to have an intelligent debate with a theist because they are not, in considering their religious beliefs, intelligent. They can't be. It's in their very emotional makeup. It's why they can't step back and consider their beliefs dispassionately, which is what's required for any intelligent discussion to go on. It's why people like Andy are so dumb. They are fanatics, not intelligent thinkers, and he's just proven it. What else is new?